To US politics now, governors are pushing back at Donald Trump over his claim he could legally reopen the American economy and end lockdowns across the entire US. He made the comments at a White House briefing that took 2.5 hours, where he also went head-to-head with media over his performance to date.
But what did you do with the time that you bought?
You know
the
we
month
did.
of February. That
we did.
Was a gap.
What do you do?
Month of February.
What do you do when you have no case in the whole United States?
You had cases
when
in February.
excuse me, you reported it. 0 cases, 0 deaths on January 17th.
February, the entire
January.
month of
I said in
January. Your video
January.
has a complete gap.
On January 30th.
What did your administration do in February with the time that your travel ban bought
A
you?
lot.
What?
A lot. And in fact, we'll give you a list. What we did, in fact, part of it was up there. We did a lot. Look. You know you're a fake. You know that. Your whole network, the way you cover it, is fake. Why did Biden apologize? Why did he write a letter of apology? No, that's very important. Why did the Democrats think that we really have done this right? The problem is the press doesn't cover it the way it should be. Go ahead. One more question, Steve. Go ahead.
Mr. Trump signalled that May 1st could be a potential date for easing the restrictions, saying he believed the president has total authority over states in the US in terms of the coronavirus response. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, though, says he would not abide by any such order.
If he ordered me to reopen in a way that would endanger the public health of the people of my state, I wouldn't do it. And we would have a constitutional challenge between the state and the federal government, and that would go into the courts, and that would be the worst possible thing he could do at this moment.
We're joined now by our US correspondent, Simon Marks. Good morning, Simon.
Good morning, Corin.
OK, now, I thought the reason the US has a constitution and separation of powers was so that, in fact, a president can't have total authority. Is that right?
Oh, you quaint old-fashioned thing, Corin. I mean, according to President Trump last night, and take a listen to the way in which he couched this, he has absolutely unchecked authority, and the reporters in the room couldn't quite believe what they were hearing, so they pushed him on it, and he insisted that absolutely checks and balances written into the country's constitution do not, in his mind, appear to apply to him.
When somebody's the president of the United States, the authority is total. And that's the way it's got to be. The authority is total. But the authority of the President of the United States having to do with the subject we're talking about is total.
Now, of course, that is simply totally untrue, as Governor Cuomo and other Democrat governors have been pointing out over the course of the last few hours. And that's not a question of the interpretation of the Constitution. It is literally what the Constitution sets in stone. Checks and balances, 3 equal branches of government, the presidency, the legislative and the judicial, and of course Republicans have for decades argued that the role of government should be to be small and fleet of foot. It should really all fall to the governors of each of America's 50 independent states to decide how to run things in their territory. That, of course, is the argument that Donald Trump was advancing as recently as a week ago when he insisted that he was morally and constitutionally opposed to the idea of introducing a national lockdown. So the man who said that he didn't want to abuse powers of his office by calling for a national lockdown is now insisting that he does have the powers necessary to order a national reopening of the government. Constitutionally and legally, it's nonsense.
Look, this is Donald Trump being in election mode, isn't it? These 2.5 hour long briefings. Does anybody seriously think he will follow through on this? He's not going to have a showdown with the governors, is he?
No, I don't think he is. Indeed, there were points during the press conference last night, and, you know, over 2 hours, he said virtually everything that one could possibly say. So there were moments in the press conference last night where he said, look, I may not go all the way down the path of having this kind of a confrontation. I might leave it up to the governors. We'll see what happens, that Donald Trump phrase that gets used time and time and again. With regard to the duration of these press conferences, though, Corin, I mean, they are now regularly be going on for longer than 2 hours. And the president's own public health experts, Dr. Anthony Fauci, Dr. Deborah Birx, both members of his coronavirus task force, they have to sit there throughout this entire thing. You might think that they had better things to be doing with their time, like going and figuring out how the United States could battle coronavirus. Well, within the last few hours, Dr. Fauci has given an interview to the Associated Press in which he has described the press briefings as really draining. He said, if I had been able just to make a few comments and then go to work, that would really have been much better. Unfortunately for him, he is currently serving the wrong president for that.
The death toll in the US is still very high. We're still seeing it's plateauing in the epicenter in New York, but still at a very high level. So what is the feeling about how safe it's going to be to come out by May 1st?
Well, I mean, that is going to be the big question over the course of the next several days and weeks. And CNN, by the way, is now reporting that the US death toll has exceeded 25,000. Johns Hopkins School of Medicine hasn't quite reached that conclusion yet, but it's clearly going to reach it within the next few hours. Governors like Andrew Cuomo in New York say this all has to be handled with tremendous care because, like the president's public health officials, like the World Health Organization, they argue that if this is all done too quickly and it's approached as though it was a light switch you can simply throw, you will very easily spark a second wave of deadly infections. So they want all this to be handled carefully. President Trump says he is assembling committees, plural committees, at the White House to advise him on how to get the economy reopened and how to get people back to work. But in several states, governors are already voting with their feet. In Virginia, for example, just to the south of us here in Washington, D.C., schools have already been told they will not be reopening until September at the earliest. So this is going to be a long, drawn-out affair.
It sure is. Hey, thank you very much for that. Simon Marks, our US correspondent there.